I drove 6 hours to walk my only daughter down the aisle, but when I arrived at the gate, I didn't find a welcoming committee. I found a security guard holding a laminated photo of my face with a thick red line drawn through it. Beneath my picture were 4 words that ended my fatherhood forever. Do not let in. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply turned my truck around and made one phone call. 4 hours later, the lights went out. The music stopped, and my daughter realized that her perfect day had ended the moment she decided I wasn't good enough to be part of it. My name is Eugene Harwick, though most folks in this town just call me Gene. At 72 years old, I've got hands that feel like sandpaper and a face that looks like a roadmap of every construction site I've ever managed. To the outside world, I'm just an old man in a 2000 Chevy Silverado that shudders when it hits 45 mob. To my daughter Nora, I am an embarrassment, a stain on her perfectly curated image. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where the truth has a way of finding the light no matter how long it's been buried. Before we get into today's story, I'd love to hear from you in the comments right now, before you know how it all unfolds. Who are you rooting for and why? Just drop a word or two. It means more than you know. One quick note. Some details in this story have been shaped for the purpose of telling it well, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. June, a Saturday. The sky that morning had no business being that blue, the kind of blue that makes you think God himself selected the date. The air was warm and easy, and I was dressed in the only tuxedo I'd ever owned, the thing swaying in the truck bed still in its plastic wrap, catching air with every pothole. Bought it 2 decades back for some awards dinner, and it's still buttoned up though. My chest had put up an argument. I'd spent an hour with a rag and a tin of black shoe polish working over my work boots because those pinch-toed patent leather shoes were not happening. Good enough, I figured. Scuffs covered. I pointed the truck toward Magnolia Bluff Resort, the kind of place where the groundskeepers might as well be using nail scissors on the grass and the fountains run some chemically enhanced shade of blue that doesn't exist in nature. Most expensive event venue in the state. $50,000 just to walk through the gate. Nora had painted me a picture of Cade as some kind of tech genius, a visionary reshaping the world, one algorithm at a time, his family practically installed in the American aristocracy. She'd said he was covering every cent of the wedding. She'd said a lot of things. I turned off the highway onto the private drive, magnolia trees lining both sides, and my old truck wheezed and shuddered its way through, like a dinosaur entering a world of Teslas and Mercedes. Ahead, a crew of young valets in crisp white jackets stood waiting, the sort of men whose palms had never met a blister. Something rose in my chest. Not envy of the luxury, pride. My daughter was getting married. Yes, we drifted. The calls had thinned out, the visits grown brief and awkward. But none of that changed what I was. I was still her father. Folded in my breast pocket was a check for $50,000. My gift to her, seed money toward a house the way I'd always imagined it. I eased up to the security checkpoint. No simple barrier this. Limestone pillars, iron gate, the whole thing engineered to communicate that you are either welcome or you are not. The guard who emerged from the booth was built like a bouncer, his uniform straining at the shoulders, his eyes invisible behind dark lenses. His gaze didn't come to me. It went to the truck, the rust along the fender, the oil weeping onto their immaculate pavement. He lifted one hand palm flat before I'd even cranked the window down. I cranked it anyway. The AC had given up the ghost 3 years prior, and the heat was already working on me. Name, he said, not a request, a verdict. Eugene Harwick. I told him, offering a smile I didn't feel. Father of the bride. No list came out. No screen was consulted. The smile went unreturned. What he did pull out was a clipboard from under the counter, which he raised and held flat against my windshield. Attached to it was a photograph, me shot from some distance, somebody's cell phone zoomed all the way in. I was on my cabin porch in denim overalls, a wrench in my hand. Unflattering. But the photo wasn't what stopped my breath. Slashed across my face in thick red marker, diagonal deliberate, and printed below in letters that meant business banned. Do not admit. If cited, call police immediately. I couldn't move. The image sat in front of me, and my mind just would not take it in the way you stare at words in a language you don't speak. There has to be some kind of error, I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect, though both hands had locked onto the steering wheel hard enough to pale my knuckles. I'm Nora's father, Nora Harwick, the bride. No error, old man, the guard said, leaning in close enough that I caught the stale coffee coming off him. I've got direct instructions from Miss Nora and Mr. Cade. No construction workers, no hillbillies, and definitely no one driving a heap of junk like this. You are ruining the aesthetic. The aesthetic. He said that word like it meant something sacred. My being there, my face, my truck, my existence was a smudge on his employer's perfect tableau. Turn it around, he said, one finger aimed back at the highway. You've already dripped enough oil on my driveway. 30 seconds or I call the sheriff. Believe me, a night in a cell is the last thing a man your age needs. The engine knocked beneath me in its slow, tired rhythm. I looked past him up the long curve of the drive toward the clubhouse. White tents dotted the lawn. Florists moved between them, hauling massive arrangements of white gardenias. Out there was the life my work had funded, though nobody inside those tents knew that yet. My phone went off. Passenger seat. Text from Nora. I picked it up telling myself it would be confusion, a correction her voice, asking where I'd gotten to. What I found was neither short nor kind. Dad, please don't cause a scene. I watched your truck come down the road. Just turn around and go back home. Cade's parents are here, and they are elite, sophisticated people. If they lay eyes on you on that truck, on your hands, on that suit, it will unravel everything. You don't belong in this world, Dad. You never did. Give me this one perfect day. I'll send pictures after. Please just go. I read through it once, started again from the top, read it a third time. Nowhere in those lines did she say she loved me. No apology, no softening. Just the verdict I would unravel everything. I didn't belong. I shifted my gaze to the guard. He was tapping his watch face with one finger, wearing a grin that told me exactly how much he was savoring this. The pleasure of sending away a man who had no business being there. He had appointed himself the sentinel of some paradise, and I was the thing he got to keep out. I said nothing. No raised voice, no argument. I didn't mention that the concrete under his booth was work I'd poured with my own crew 20 years back. Didn't bring up the fact that I could call the resort's owner by his given name. Just nodded once. Understood, I said. Reverse. Slow. The gravel spoke under my tires as I swung wide and eased back down the Magnolia Line drive, the white tents getting smaller in the rear view, until the trees swallowed them whole. Then, nothing but road. I left the radio off. The silence had a job to do. I needed it to help me sit with what had just happened. The girl I'd hoisted onto my shoulders so she could see above the crowd. The girl whose knees I'd cleaned up and bandaged on the back steps. The girl I'd sent through 4 years of college on double shifts in the dead of winter, soaking wet and bone-tired. She'd taken my name off the list. I stared at my hands wrapped around the wheel. Rough, darkened by 30-odd years of oil and paint and poured cement. Nora hadn't been wrong about that. Nobody would call these hands elegant. They had framed walls and laid pipe and poured footings in January mud. But today they'd been deemed unfit to be seen. My thoughts pulled back a week. The memory arrived the way a bad one always does, sudden and unwelcome, like gravel in your boot. Nora had brought Cade out to meet me. No warning, just showed up. I was at my cabin 3 acres near the river, a modest wooden house I'd raised myself, board by board after Lorene died. Not grand, but mine and built by hand, and that counted for something to me. Cade arrived in a rented Maserati. He unfolded himself from the seat, dressed in a suit that would have bought my truck twice over, walked up to the cabin and let his eyes do what his mouth hadn't gotten around to yet. So, this is the shack, he said. No greeting, no hand extended toward mine. Just that assessment delivered like a fact. Nora laughed sharp, uncomfortable, a little too quick. I know, she said, threading her arm through his. I've been telling him to put it on the market. The land's got value even if the structure doesn't. Think what that money could do for your crypto project, Cade. Dad would actually be contributing something. I was standing 4 feet away. I had a tray of sweet tea I had just made for them, held out like an offering. I absorbed every syllable, contributing something. That was the ceiling they'd set for me. Not father, not the man who built the thing they were standing in front of. A resource. Money in a wrapper of old denim and worn-out skin. I swallowed it, brought the sweet tea in, sat and let Cade hold court about his company. His systems, the billions that were coming his way, any quarter now. Sat and watched Nora nod along to every word, her eyes so full of him, there was no room left for doubt. Then, on their way out, she turned back. Dad, about the wedding. We're doing it small, just tight friends. Honestly, don't stress yourself over the drive. It's a lot of miles for someone your age. I had pushed back. I'd told her there was no way I was missing this, that I'd set money aside, that being there meant everything to me. She'd let out a long breath. Fine. But please, Dad, at least try to look presentable. Now pulling away from Magnolia Bluff Resort, it was clear to me that presentable had never been the point. The point was erasure. She wanted me gone, wanted the money she figured she could unlock by selling off my home. But she had no use for the man attached to it. I reached into my breast pocket and drew out the cashier's check for $50,000. I held it between my fingers for a moment, then I tore it down the middle, then in half again. I rolled down the window and let the pieces catch the wind. They scattered back along the highway like confetti at someone else's party. The sadness was gone. It had burned off the instant I saw that red line drawn through my face. In its place was something cooler, something with edges. The clear-eyed recognition of a man who studied a blueprint and spotted the flaw running all the way to the footing. When a structure is rotten at its base, you don't hang new siding on it. You don't caulk the cracks. You bring it down. I picked up my phone, not to call Nora, not to plead my way back through that gate. I scrolled until I landed on the name I was looking for. Mr. Aberly. Clifton Aberly was my attorney, but that only tells half the story. He was also the custodian of everything I'd built, the man who administered the Harwick Trust. Because here was what Nora and Cade had gotten badly wrong. They'd read me by my truck, by my overalls. They'd decided that a man who lives without frills must be without means, that a cabin near the river meant empty pockets. They had no idea I'd walked away from construction 10 years back after selling my company for $8 million. They didn't know I held the deeds on 3 apartment complexes across the city. They had no idea I was the silent majority shareholder of the hospitality group that owned Magnolia Bluff Resort itself. I hit call. Aberly picked up on the second ring. Jean, is everything all right? The ceremony ought to be underway by now. It's not underway, Clifton, I said. My voice didn't shake. Pull up the file on the Magnolia Bluff event, the Nora Harwick and Cade Pelton wedding. Got it right here, Aberly said. You settled the invoice in full last month. $200,000 routed through the anonymous donor clause exactly as you specified. Nora believes Cade's family covered it. Correction, I said. I want you to trigger clause 14C of the sponsorship agreement. The line went quiet. I heard him moving papers. Clause 14C. A beat. Jean, are you certain that's the immediate revocation provision, funding pulled on the spot? If the benefactor is insulted, denied entry, or treated with contempt by the beneficiaries. That's the nuclear option. I'm certain, I said. I was turned away at the gate. I was banned. They've got a laminated photograph of my face posted at the security booth. Good God, Aberle whispered. The professional composure dropped right out of his voice. They did what? Shut it down, Clifton. Call the venue manager. Call the caterers. Call the florists. Tell them the card on file has been flagged as stolen. Tell them the funding is gone and they need to stop everything, right now. Jean, the reception is already in progress. Guests are seated. If we pull this trigger, it becomes a full collapse. I know, I said. I watched the highway unspool ahead of me. Do it, and Clifton. Yes, Jean. Contact resort management. I want access to the security camera feed. If I'm not permitted inside to witness my daughter's wedding, I intend to watch it from my iPad. Consider it handled, Aberle said. I ended the call, 20 minutes from home, 20 minutes until I could pour something into a glass, settle into my chair, and watch the whole structure come apart. They'd wanted a wedding scrubbed clean of me. They were about to get precisely that. But there was one detail they had overlooked. Weddings run on money, and the bank of Dad had just shuttered permanently. I turned onto the dirt track leading to my cabin. The sun had begun its descent, throwing long, late-afternoon shadows across the porch boards. Quiet out here. The river murmured in the distance, birds working through their business in the trees. Hard to believe what I'd just set in motion from a truck cab on the highway. Inside, I didn't bother with the lights. I crossed the room to the wall safe concealed behind a painting of the old covered bridge. I worked the dial, click, 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 and the heavy door came open. Deeds, certificates, a paper record of 40 years of hard work and careful decisions. I lifted out the folder marked Nora. Inside were the trust documents I'd drawn up for her, an arrangement that would have paid her a monthly allowance for the rest of her natural life, a cushion against every unexpected bill, every medical emergency, every bad season. I carried the folder to my desk, opened the top drawer, and brought out the red stamp I kept for rejected construction bids. Void. First page thump, second thump, third thump. The sound of it rang out in the stillness. Not rage, just accounting. Closing out a line item that no longer applied. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a measure of cheap bourbon that burns on the way down. Not the kind of thing Cade would touch. No label worth bragging about. It tasted honest. I took the glass back to my leather armchair, settled in, and opened the iPad. I pulled up the secure server for Magnolia Bluff Resort. Aberlee had moved quickly. The login credentials were already waiting in my inbox. I selected the feed for the grand ballroom, and the picture blinked on. I'll give them this. They'd done the room right. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain. Tables gleamed with gold-rimmed china and cut crystal stemware. White-jacketed waiters threaded through the guests carrying trays of champagne. I found Nora near the head table. She looked radiant, genuinely radiant. Laughing wine in hand, the other hand resting lightly on Cade's arm. She looked like a woman who believed everything had gone according to plan. Like a woman who'd neutralized the one problem that could have ruined the day. I found Cade nearby, chest out working a small cluster of men, probably pitching something. He moved through the room like a man who believed he owned it. Beside them sat an older couple, the man in a tuxedo, the woman in a sequined gown. Distinguished looking, moneyed looking. Cade's elite parents, the ones Nora had warned me would find me so unacceptable. I zoomed the camera in on their faces. Something didn't fit. They weren't watching Cade with the warm glow of proud parents. They were glancing at their watches. They looked like people fulfilling an obligation and counting the minutes until they could leave. I took a slow sip of bourbon. Then it happened. The massive chandelier above the dance floor stuttered one blink, two, and went dark. The orchestral music that had been swelling softly through the room quit mid-phrase with a screech of feedback. The ballroom dropped into a dim half-light, nothing illuminating it but the red glow of the exit signs and the small candles guttering on each table. Heads turned. I saw the confusion ripple through the crowd like a wave. Nora's smile disappeared. She tapped the microphone on the lectern. Nothing? Her expression shifted from surprise to something tighter irritation folding into the first edge of alarm. Then, a figure in a dark suit stepped onto the stage. I recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Grady, the resort's general manager. No microphone available, so he cupped both hands to his mouth. I turned my iPad volume all the way up. The security mics were sensitive enough. I could hear the crowd settle into a murmur, and then into silence as Grady began. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grady called out, his voice bouncing off the walls of the suddenly quiet room. "I apologize for this interruption. We have just received notification that the funding for this event has been withdrawn. The credit line has been canceled by the account holder." I watched Nora drop her wine glass. It hit the dance floor and burst apart red, spreading across the white of her Monique Louillier custom-designed silk and lace like something bleeding. "This is a private facility." Grady continued, no warmth in his voice whatsoever. "Without confirmed payment, we are unable to continue services. The kitchen is closed, the bar is closed. We are requesting that all guests vacate the premises within 15 minutes. The room came apart. Nora pushed through the crowd toward Grady, her voice climbing into something shrill and desperate. "What are you talking about? My husband paid for this. Run the card again." Grady raised a tablet and turned the screen toward her. "The payment was originated by the Harwick Trust, ma'am. Authorization came from Mr. Eugene Harwick. He has flagged the transaction as unauthorized use of funds and issued a stop payment order." I watched Nora's face on the screen. Every bit of color left it at once fast and total, like a light switched off. "My father," she whispered. The security microphones caught every word of it. "My father has no money. He lives in a shack." "I wouldn't know about that, ma'am," Grady said, backing away from her outstretched hands. "What I do know is that the Harwick Trust holds a significant ownership stake in this resort, and Mr. Harwick's instructions carry full authority here. You have 14 minutes. I took another pull of bourbon. The burn settled nicely. This was only the opening act. The lights were down, but the real performance hadn't started yet. Nora was about to discover what happens when you bar the man who poured the foundation. The whole structure above it doesn't stand. I stepped back inside the cabin and let the heavy oak door swing shut behind me. The quiet came down like a curtain. I left the lights off. I didn't need to see the worn rug or the scuffed walls to navigate. I had laid every plank of this floor myself 40 years ago, and I knew it in the dark. Moonlight pressed through the dusty blinds and threw long, thin bars of shadow across the room. To anybody peering through the glass, this was nothing but the dim, still living room of a lonely widower with nothing left but old furniture and old memories. They'd have been wrong. I moved through the dark to the study at the back of the house. On the far wall hung a simple watercolor of the lake Lorraine had painted it 3 months before she passed, and my fingers found the frame the way hands find anything they've reached for 1,000 times. I eased it aside. Behind it sat a Titan steel safe sunk into the load-bearing studs of the wall, cold and solid to the touch. I turned the dial, left to 24, right to 10, left to 72. The date I laid the first brick of my first company. The tumblers seated themselves with a sound like a pistol being cocked. I pulled the handle down, and the door swung open, releasing the smell of cold metal and aged paper. No stacks of currency inside. No gold. Something considerably more dangerous. Information. I drew out a leather-bound portfolio, carried it to the desk, and clicked on the small brass lamp. The yellow circle of light fell across documents that Nora had never imagined existed. The top sheet was a deed not to the cabin, but to the Cumberland Ridge apartment complex. 300 units, everyone occupied, no debt against it. Below that, a majority shareholder certificate for Harwick Construction. Holdings the company I had ostensibly sold off for nothing, but which I'd quietly restructured into a passive income engine, generating $40,000 a month in dividends alone. Nora believed I scraped by on a pension and a Social Security deposit. She figured the reason I drove a 20-year-old truck was that I couldn't manage the payments on a new one. She never grasped the thing about real wealth. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. Wealth is the freedom to let a security guard look down at your boots and feel nothing. Then I opened the blue folder, the one that mattered tonight. On top sat the invoice for the Magnolia Bluff Resort wedding package, $212,000 settled in, full by wire transfer 3 months ago. At the bottom of the page, a signature line, not Cade Pelton, not the Pelton family. The signature there was Eugene Harwick. Beside it, the addendum I had required as a condition of payment, the privacy clause specifying that the identity of the funding source must be withheld from the bride and groom unless a contractual breach occurred. I ran my thumb across the ink. Nora had come to me weeping months back, saying Cade's capital was tied up in overseas holdings, and they needed a deposit to lock in the venue date. That was the story she'd given me. It was a lie. Cade had no capital tied up. He was broke. I'd known it since the day they announced the engagement because I'd run a credit check on him that same week. I had paid for this wedding, not out of naivety, but because I wanted my daughter to have the day she dreamed of, even if the man she was marrying was a fraud. I had absorbed her fiancé's humiliation. I had underwritten his deception. I had literally funded the ground beneath her feet. And what she'd offered me in return was a laminated photograph of my own face posted at the gate like a wanted notice. I reached back into the safe for one final document. A commercial lease agreement, the master lease on the land Magnolia Bluff Resort occupied. I had purchased that acreage 30 years ago when it was nothing but bottomland and timber. I had leased it to the resort management company on a 99-year term. I wasn't simply the man who'd bankrolled the party. I was the landlord of the soil Nora was standing on at this very moment. I could have moved to evict the entire operation that would have taken months in court, but I didn't need to go that far. All I needed to do was cut the wire. I looked at the papers fanned out beneath the lamp. Each one was proof of a life spent constructing things that lasted: savings, investments, properties, agreements. A legacy I had assembled for Nora. Tonight she had thrown out the builder while trying to keep the building. I read the clause again. Clause 14, C, breach of conduct. The benefactor held the right to terminate the event immediately if the venue or its guests acted in a manner that dishonored the donor. Banning the man who wrote the check, qualified without question. I was no longer just an old man in a muddy truck. Under this lamp, surrounded by these papers, I was the institution. I was the bank. I was the board. And I was calling in a debt that no one in that ballroom had any way to repay. I closed the portfolio. The sound it made was final, a gavel coming down on hardwood. It was time. I reached into the bottom desk drawer, past the rolled-up blueprints and the faded tax returns from 1998, and closed my hand around a thick manila envelope. It had arrived by private courier 3 days ago. No return address, just a red stamp reading confidential. I had not opened it until now. Part of me, the part that was still just a father who wanted to walk his daughter down the aisle, had wanted to let the fairy tale breathe a little longer. I wanted Cade to be the visionary Nora described. I wanted her to have chosen someone who would take care of her the way I always had. But the builder in me, the man who won't pour a single yard of concrete until the soil has been tested, had known better. A month ago, when Nora began calling me with urgent requests for large sums of cash to fund investment opportunities Cade had sourced, I had quietly engaged Farwell, best private investigator in the state. I pulled the tab on the envelope. The paper tore cleanly in the silence. I spread the contents on the desk beside the resort deed. A dossier. A substantial 1 pages clipped together, smelling of fresh toner and unvarnished fact. The cover page was a summary, a background report on one Cade Alexander Pelton. I worked through the basics: date of birth, social security number, last known address. That address was not the penthouse Nora had described to me with such pride. It was a sublet in a transient pocket of the city out near the airport. I moved to the employment history. Nora had told me Cade was CEO of a company called Apex Horizon. She said they were revolutionizing the blockchain. She had used words like synergy and disruption, with the confidence of someone who believed them. Farwell was nothing if not thorough. Occupation: unemployed. Prior roles: shift supervisor at a car rental agency, terminated for cause. Sales associate at a cell phone kiosk, resigned after 3 months. There was no Apex Horizon, not as any functioning enterprise. There was only a website registered on a free domain, host 3 months ago, dressed up with stock photos of strangers in glass-walled conference rooms. The CEO headshot wasn't even Cade. It was a model pulled from a stock image library. I turned the page and felt a cold weight settle in my gut. The financial section. Here is where the story stopped being merely sad and became something else entirely. Cade was not sitting on millions. He was buried under debt, the crushing, suffocating kind with no daylight above it. The report showed judgments from 3 different credit card companies, totaling over $80,000. And that was the respectable debt, the kind you could address in a bankruptcy filing. The next section covered the other kind. Farwell had dug down to where the records get murky. Gambling, tunica, offshore sports, betting operations based in the Caribbean, underground poker and back rooms across the city. Cade was a gambler, and by every measure in this report, a losing one. Total estimated liabilities to unlicensed lenders: $547,000, $500,000. I sat with that number. This wasn't recklessness. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a man who owed the wrong people an amount that tends to follow you until it ends you. I saw in an instant what this wedding actually was. Not a celebration, not a declaration of love, a fundraiser. Cade wasn't marrying my daughter because he loved her. He was marrying her because he needed the cash gifts. He needed a line into her credit score, which was still spotless thanks to the years I'd spent teaching her right. He needed a wife he could position as a buffer between himself and the kind of men who collect debts with their fists. I worked through the photographs attached to the file. Grainy shots of Cade outside a pool hall going chest to chest with men in leather jackets. Photos of him sliding a Rolex across a pawn counter. Photos of him pulling up in a rented Lamborghini, the same one he'd driven to my cabin to sneer at it and returning it an hour later to dodge the excess mileage charge. A hollow man, a shell of bluster and desperation, with a thin coat of arrogance sprayed over the surface. And my daughter, my sharp-driven Nora, had swallowed it completely, hook and all. She had looked at his rented suit and his leased car, and decided she was looking at a prince. She had looked at my paid-off truck and my paid-off land, and decided she was looking at a peasant. A surge of fury came up so fast it blurred my vision. I wanted to turn the truck around, go back through those gates, and drag him off that dance floor by his collar. I wanted to lay every page of that file out in front of every guest in the room. But then I turned to the section marked "The Parents." This was the twist of the blade. This was what converted the hot fury in my chest into something colder and more deliberate. Nora had been so precise about Cade's people. Old money, she'd said, the sort of family that summers on Kiowa Island and winters in Telluride. Cultured, refined, the kind of people who wouldn't know what to make of a man like me. That was her justification for the photograph at the gate. She was shielding their sensibilities from the spectacle of her blue-collar father. I looked at what Farwell had actually found. The man seated at the head table was not an oil baron. His name was Holt. He was a retired high school drama teacher who picked up income doing local car dealership commercials. I placed him now. He was the man who hollered about low financing rates on the local cable channel at 2:00 in the morning. The woman beside him was no socialite. Her name was Brenda. She was a former hostess who supplemented her income through a casting agency that placed distinguished seniors for events. Booking fee, $200 an hour plus meals. I settled back into the leather chair, the old frame creaking under me. The quiet of the cabin pressed in from all sides. My daughter had written off her real father, the man who held her hand through the stitches, who paid for her braces, who ran alongside her until she found her balance on that first bike to make space for 2 actors hired out of a catalog. She had traded flesh and blood for props. She was ashamed of me, of the sawdust in my collar and the calluses mapped across my palms. She had wanted the fantasy badly enough to cut out the one genuinely real thing in her life to get it. The anger I'd felt a moment before began to drain away, and what settled in behind it was a vast cold pity. Clinical. Quiet. I looked at the photo of Nora clipped inside the folder. She looked radiant and thoroughly unaware, no idea the shark beside her had already picked the pocket she didn't know she had. She believed she had hit the jackpot. She thought she was stepping up into a world that had always been just out of reach. She was walking straight into a trap. Cade was going to hollow her out financially. He would work through every dollar I had ever put aside for her. He would wreck her credit mortgage, her future, and disappear when the well ran dry, leaving nothing behind but debt and the memory of a wedding that wasn't what it appeared. If I went back there now and stopped it by force, she would never forgive me. She'd say I was jealous. She'd say I couldn't stand to see her happy. She would never accept the dossier. She'd insist it was fabricated. She was too far inside the illusion to see the walls. I understood then that I couldn't pull her out of the fall. I could only decide when to fold up the net. She had called me simple. She had measured my worth by my dirt-stained work clothes and decided she was the sharper one because she worked in marketing and I worked in the ground. But she couldn't spot a con man standing 3 feet in front of her face. I picked up the photo of the hired couple again, Holt and Brenda. They were likely working through the meal I had paid for at this very moment, drinking the vintage champagne I had authorized, playing their parts with quiet professionalism, smiling on cue, glancing at their watches when they thought no one was watching, calculating how many more minutes remained on their shift before they could collect their envelopes and leave, and Nora beaming at them, desperate for their approval, straining toward acceptance from a family that had been assembled for the occasion. It was pathetic. It was the saddest thing I had witnessed in my life. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the dossier where Farwell had stapled a printout of text messages. He'd managed to clone Cade's phone during a brief window. The messages were from the previous day, Cade to a contact, saved as Rocco. Don't worry about the payment. Wedding's tomorrow. The old man gave her a fat check plus the cash gifts. I'll have your $50K by Monday. Just call off the dogs. From Nora to Cade. I handled my dad. He won't be coming. I told security to keep him out. I don't want him embarrassing your parents. From Cade to Nora. Good girl. We don't need that trash around us. We are building an empire, babe. Trash. That was his word for me, and she had accepted it. Good girl. He spoke to her the way you speak to a dog you've trained to bite the hand that used to feed it. I shut the dossier. The pity hardened into something load-bearing. I was no longer just a father who'd been turned away at a gate. I was the judge, and the verdict was already written. She wanted her fantasy fine. I would let it run. I would let her stand there in the dark beside her invented husband and his hired parents and feel what the world actually felt like when the man she'd discarded stopped holding it up. This wasn't cruelty. I want to be clear about that. This was the only education that would reach her. You cannot raise a life on fabrications. You cannot stake a future on someone else's debt. And you cannot find happiness by dismantling the only person who ever loved you unconditionally. I looked at the phone. Time to call Aberly. Time to kill the power. Time to let Nora see exactly what her chosen empire was worth once the Bank of Dad ceased operations. I reached for the receiver. My hand was steady as a surveyor's level. The urge to cry had left me entirely. What I felt now was the focused calm of a man with a job to do. Tonight, the job was demolition. I was going to bring it down one false brick at a time. The receiver was one of those old, heavy black phones, the kind that has some actual weight to it, like a tool. I dialed Clifton Aberley's private mobile number. From memory, I'd had it memorized for 20 years, since the days he'd steered me through the zoning battles that had ultimately allowed me to build the very resort where my daughter was at this moment, celebrating my removal from her life. The line rang once, twice, then a click. Aberley's voice came through clean and measured, though underneath it I caught the faint noise of a room behind him. He was at his home office, I was certain, watching the situation develop, anticipating this call. He knew me well enough to understand I hadn't simply driven off into the evening without a next move. "It's time, Clifton," I said. No tremor, no hesitation. The same register I used 30 years ago, calling a foreman to tear out a framing job that failed inspection. Flat. Conclusive. A silence settled on the line, long and deliberate. "You want to execute Clause 14C, Aberley said at last. No surprise in his voice, just the measured gravity of a man who understood that when a contract is broken, the remedy has to follow. "Execute it," I confirmed. "But pulling the funding isn't where this ends. I want a complete facility lockout. We move from sponsorship withdrawal to full hostile shutdown." I leaned forward, forearms on the dossier of Cade's fabrications. "Walk me through the kill switch, Clifton, step by step. I want to know exactly what happens next." Aberley cleared his throat. Pages moved on his end. "All right, Gene, I have the master control agreement for Magnolia Bluff open in front of me. As majority shareholder of the holding company, you carry executive override authority across all facility operations. Step 1 is financial severance. I'm logging into the merchant portal now." I waited. I lifted the glass and took a slow sip of bourbon. "Done," he said. Aberley told me the master account tied to the event had been frozen. The credit limit was zeroed out. Any further charges the venue staff tried to run drinks overtime, incidentals would be declined on the spot. The open bar tab was dead. "Good," I said. "Now the infrastructure. I want the room dead, Clifton." I am reaching the facility manager, Dave, on the other line. Aberley said his voice was moving as fast as his fingers. "I am issuing a code red override. This directs the engineering team to isolate the power grid serving the grand ballroom. We are not cutting the emergency lights. We don't want injuries on our hands. But the main stage power, the audio-visual circuits, and the atmospheric lighting are all going dark." "How long?" I asked. 90 seconds, Aberley replied. "Dave is standing at the breaker panel right now. He is waiting on my confirmation code." "Give it to him," I said. "And the sound system runs on a separate loop," Aberley explained. "We are remotely revoking the digital license on the DJ's interface. His console is going to lock up solid, the microphones will go mute, the speakers will cut out. Silence, Gene. Absolute silence. And the food," I asked. "I spent $50,000 on a 5-course meal. I don't want Cade or his fake parents getting a single bite of the entree." "The catering manager is getting the call right now. Aberley said the order is to halt service immediately. The waitstaff is being instructed to clear the tables. If the food hasn't been plated yet, it stays in the warming ovens. If it is already on the table, it gets bussed. The contract specifies that upon funding cancellation, all unconsumed inventory reverts to the vendor. They aren't going to feed a party that isn't paying." I looked down at the iPad screen. The party was still in full swing. Nora was laughing. Cade was pouring champagne. The two of them looked so settled, so untouchable. "One more thing, Clifton," I said. "The honeymoon suite, the presidential villa." "Ah," Aberley said, "the jewel of the resort. Lock it out," I ordered. "I want their key cards deactivated. I want the reservation stripped from the system. I want security to flag their names. If they try to go up there tonight to hide, to sleep, to consummate this mockery of a marriage, I want the red light to flash on that door. I want them standing in the hallway with their bags, realizing they have nowhere left to go." "It is done," Gene Aberley said, his voice dropping low. "I just pushed the command to the central server. The keys are plastic scrap. The room has been released back into inventory." I drew a slow breath. There was something strange about wielding this kind of invisible power. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't making a scene. I was sitting in a dark cabin miles away, quietly flipping switches that would dismantle my daughter's world. It felt like surgery necessary, painful and precise. Aberley's voice broke through his professional composure for just a moment. "Are you sure? Once I give Dave the final go-ahead on the power, there is no unringing this bell. The humiliation will be public. It will be total." I looked at that photograph of me on the clipboard the guard had held up. "Banned. Do not let in. They wanted me out. Clifton." I said they wanted to erase me. I am simply giving them what they asked for. A wedding completely free of my presence, which means free of my money, my property, and my protection. I understand, Aberle said. Executing sequence now. I heard furious keystrokes. Financials terminated. He read down the list. Catering stop order issued. Security alerted to remove unauthorized guests once the contract is voided. And power cut initiated. I watched the screen. It's happening. Aberle said, "Goodbye, Jean. Call me if you need bail money, though I suspect Kate is the one who will need it." I set the phone down. I fixed my eyes on the iPad. The feed delay was only a few seconds. I watched the moment the order hit the system. I saw the chandeliers flicker. I saw the lights die. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the terrified faces caught in the trembling glow of the table candles. It was done. The builder had pulled the cornerstone. Now, all that was left was to watch the collapse. I poured 2 more fingers of cheap bourbon into my glass and leaned in closer to the screen. Camera 4 gave a wide panoramic sweep of the grand ballroom, a high-angle view that made the guests look like chess pieces arranged on a very expensive board. The scene was one of absolute manufacture perfection. The floral centerpieces were towering arrangements of white dahlias and gardenias costing $300 a table. The linens were crushed velvet in a shade of champagne that Nora had declared essential to the ambiance. Light poured through the crystal chandeliers and scattered across the room in a shimmering golden haze that softened the edges of everything. It was beautiful, it was expensive, and it was entirely fraudulent. I zoomed in on the head table. There was Kate on his feet holding a flute of Dom Perignon. Even through the digital feed, I could make out the sheen of perspiration on his forehead. He was in his element, or at least the element he worked so furiously to pretend he belonged to. His tuxedo fit him a little too perfectly tailored within an inch of its life to disguise the fact that he was a man buckling under $500,000 of debt. His free hand moved in broad gestures as he worked the men at the next table. These weren't friends. I recognized one of them, the local Lexus dealer. Cade wasn't celebrating his marriage. He was networking. He was pitching. I turned up the volume on the iPad. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and courteous laughter drifted through my quiet cabin. I could pull out snippets of Cade's voice, loud and brash, cutting right through the murmur. Blockchain integration, he was saying, pumping his fist once. We are talking about a paradigm shift in how assets are liquidated. Apex Horizon isn't just a company, gentlemen. It is a movement. You get in on the ground floor now, and in 6 months, you are looking at a 10x return. Conservative estimate. He took a swallow of champagne, not sipping it like a gentleman, but gulping it like a man who needed the liquid courage. He looked manic. His eyes swept the room, scanning the exits, scanning the faces, maybe searching for the debt collectors he knew were circling. But to everyone in that room, he was the picture of young, aggressive success. He was selling the dream, and every last person was buying it, because the venue was so opulent, the wine was so good, and the lie was so pretty. Then the camera drifted slightly left, and I saw Nora. My heart didn't break. It had already broken at the gate. Now it only felt heavy like a stone settling into mud. She looked radiant. Her dress was Monique Lhuillier, custom-designed silken lace that cost more than my first car. Her hand rested on the table, the diamond ring Cade had bought on credit, likely secured against her own social security number, without her knowledge catching the candlelight. She wasn't looking at Cade with love. She was looking at him with triumph. Her eyes moved across the room, drinking in the envy of her bridesmaids, the admiration of the guests, the sheer scale of the event. She was wearing the smile of someone who believes they have pulled off the heist of the century. She had successfully excised her past. She had scrubbed away the blue-collar stain of her upbringing. No rough hands here, no old trucks, no embarrassing fathers in denim, just gold crystal and the illusion of aristocracy. She turned to the woman beside her, Brenda, the actress hired at $200 an hour. Nora leaned in and whispered something, laughing softly. Brenda laughed back a practiced hollow sound and patted Nora's hand. It was a performance within a performance. Nora was desperate for this woman's approval, desperate to be claimed by this fake matriarch of a fake dynasty. She was basking in the attention of a stranger she believed was her mother-in-law. It was excruciating to watch, like seeing a child play house inside a building that was already on fire. I watched a waiter approach the head table with a silver tray. He set a plate of filet mignon in front of Cade. I knew that steak. Prime dry-aged ribeye, $90 a pound. I had approved the invoice myself. Cade took up his knife and fork and sawed into the meat with a ferocity that gave away his nerves. He ate fast, almost frantically, as though he feared someone would pull the plate before he could finish. Nora took a delicate bite of her lobster. She swept the room with her eyes again, her gaze settling for a moment on the empty chair at the back where I should have been sitting. But she didn't look sad. She looked relieved. She lifted her glass in a quiet toast to herself. She had done it. She had curated her life to perfection. I checked the timestamp on the security feed. It was 7:42 p.m. Auberly had told me the kill switch would execute in 90 seconds. That was 2 minutes ago. The feed delay meant it was unfolding right now. On the screen, Cade rose to his feet again. He tapped his glass with a spoon. The sharp ringing cut through the iPad speakers. The room settled. He straightened his bow tie and squared his shoulders. He looked like a rooster crowing from atop a mountain of debt. "I want to propose a toast," Cade announced, his voice filling the room. "To the future, to building empires, and to family, the kind of family that matches our ambition." Nora beamed. She gazed up at him, her eyes glassy with tears of joy. She truly believed she had won. She believed this moment was the opening chapter of her golden age. I took a pull of cheap bourbon and let it settle. "Enjoy the toast, Cade," I murmured into the empty cabin. "Because you are about to learn that empires built on other people's money have a nasty habit of collapsing when the rent comes due." Up on the screen, the massive crystal chandelier above their heads gave a sudden violent flicker. It wasn't a subtle dimming, it was a spasm. The light surged white-hot for a fraction of a second, illuminating every trace of greed and fear on Cade's face with brutal clarity, and then everything went black. The darkness wasn't simply an absence of light, it was a physical weight that dropped onto that room like a hammer blow. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence. No breathing, no movement, just the stunned shock of a world that had ceased to exist. Then, the screaming started, not the screams of people in mortal danger. These were the screams of entitlement being denied. It was 200 people suddenly discovering that their comfort had been stripped away without their permission. I watched through the iPad as the infrared night vision on the security cameras engaged, turning the scene into a pale, ghostly green monochrome. Cade was still on his feet, glass raised, frozen like a statue. He tapped the microphone. Thump, thump, nothing. The feedback loop was dead. His voice, which moments ago had thundered about empires and blockchain, was now just a small, unremarkable sound inside a very large, very dark room. Then the emergency lights stuttered on. They weren't the warm, golden sconces of the ballroom. They were harsh industrial halogens bolted above the exit doors. They threw long, jagged shadows across the tables, twisting the floral arrangements into strange, looming shapes and draining the color from every face in the room. The fairy tale illusion had evaporated. What remained was a warehouse full of bewildered people in expensive clothes. The service doors swung open. A phalanx of waitstaff marched through. They weren't carrying trays of food. They came with bus tubs. They moved with the precision of a drill team, acting on the order Aberlay had sent through. The tables began disappearing before anyone could object. I watched one waiter lift a wine bottle off a table before a guest could pour a second glass. I watched another slide a plate of untouched appetizers from directly under a bridesmaid's nose. The crowd's murmur swelled into a roar of indignation. What is going on? Where is the power? Why are they taking the food? Then the man I had been waiting for stepped into the frame. Mr. Grady, the general manager, walked out to the center of the dance floor. He had no need for a microphone. His voice was the kind that could carve through concrete. He carried a tablet in one hand and a megaphone in the other, though he left it at his side for now. He looked straight up at the head table, directly at Cade and Nora. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grady called out. The room quieted, not from respect, but from sheer confusion. "May I have your attention, please? This event has been terminated effective immediately." Nora shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward with a loud crash. She picked her way through the dim room, her white dress reduced to gray in the emergency lighting. She rushed to the edge of the stage and glared down at Grady with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Terminated!" she shrieked. Her voice cracked on the word. "Are you out of your mind? Do you know who we are? My husband paid for this entire evening. Turn the lights back on right now, or I will sue you for everything you own." Grady didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He regarded her with the worn patience of a man who has handled tantrums his entire career and who finally holds the authority to put one to rest. "Mrs. Pelton," Grady said, his voice reaching the back wall without effort, "your husband did not pay for this event. The invoice for the Magnolia Bluff Grand Package totaling $212,000 was settled by the Harwick Trust. A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers broke out. Harwick, isn't that her maiden name? Nora went rigid. The Harwick Trust, that's my father. But that's impossible. He doesn't have that kind of money. He's a construction worker. I cannot speak to your father's profession, Ma'am Grady said, tapping his tablet. What I can tell you is that Eugene Harwick is the account holder. And 10 minutes ago, Mr. Harwick issued a formal stop payment order on all funds tied to this event, citing a breach of contract. Breach of contract? Nora stammered. She turned back to look at Cade, who had sunk into his chair with his face buried in his hands. What breach? Grady looked up at her, and even through the grainy feed, I could read the cold satisfaction in his expression. Clause 14. C. Grady announced to the room, the donor reserves the right to withdraw funding if denied access to the event or treated with indignity. Gate security reported that Mr. Harwick was refused entry to these premises on your specific instruction. He was turned away at the gate. The room gasped. It was a single collective intake of breath that seemed to pull the air from the ballroom. Guests turned to one another. The whispers sharpened. She banned her own father, the man who paid for all of this. I thought she said her husband was some kind of crypto millionaire. Nora looked around, her eyes wide with mounting panic. She was losing the narrative. The carefully constructed story, the self-made woman marrying the tech visionary, was coming apart, thread by thread, in front of everyone she had wanted to impress. That's a lie, she screamed, thrusting a shaking finger at Grady. My dad is a broke old man. He lives in a shack. He couldn't pay for a cup of coffee, let alone this wedding. Cade paid Cade, tell them. She spun toward Cade. She seized his shoulder and shook him. Cade, tell him. Show him the receipt. Show him the bank transfer. Cade looked up. His face was the color of chalk slick with sweat. He had the look of a cornered animal. He didn't look at Nora. He looked at the exit signs. Cade, Nora breathed. The head table microphone had been cut, but the ambient mics picked her up clearly. Why aren't you saying anything? Cade got slowly to his feet. He reached for his jacket lapels, but his hands were trembling too badly to straighten them. There was a mix-up with the bank, Cade mumbled. It was feeble. It was pathetic. My funds are overseas. The transfer must have bounced. I asked your dad to cover the deposit just in case. The deposit? Grady let out a short, hard laugh. Mr. Pelton, the Harwick Trust paid the full balance 3 months ago. You haven't contributed a dime. In fact, the card you put on file for incidentals was declined an hour ago on a $10 charge at the lobby bar. The humiliation was total. It was absolute. 200 people watched as the golden boy crumbled to dust. The man who claimed to be building empires couldn't even buy himself a cocktail. Grady raised the megaphone. He wasn't speaking to Nora anymore. He addressed the room entire. The kitchen is closed. Grady's voice boomed, amplified, and distorted, bouncing off the walls like a pronouncement of judgment. The bar is closed. Security is escorting the valet staff off the premises as we speak. If you need your vehicle, collect your keys from the front desk immediately. You have 10 minutes to vacate the property before we lock the main gates. The panic came instantly. Not the panic of danger, the panic of inconvenience. The elite guests, the very people Nora had ached to impress, did not rally around her. They offered nothing. They scrambled. I watched women in $5,000 gowns shouldering past one another to reach the doors. I watched men in tuxedos barking into their phones, demanding their drivers appear. The waitstaff never broke stride. They stripped the tablecloths from the tables while guests still stood beside them. The clatter of silverware clanging into bus bins was the soundtrack to the whole exodus. Nora stood alone on the stage. Cade had dissolved into the crowd, gone like a thief slipping out a back window. She stared at the empty tables. She stared at the half-eaten food being wheeled away. She stared into the darkness that had closed in all around her. Standing there on that stage, she was the spitting image of the child who used to melt down in supermarket aisles when I refused to buy her a candy bar. The difference was that this time, nobody was coming to lift her off the floor. Nobody was going to make it better. I raised my glass of warm bourbon and drank. Warm didn't matter. I had a front row seat to the whole unraveling. The exodus was already underway, but the wreckage wasn't finished settling. I spotted the 2 hired players, Holt and Brenda Cade's counterfeit mother and father, rising from their seats at the head table. No panic on their faces, just the flat, impatient look of people whose shift had run long. Holt glanced at his watch. Brenda slung her purse over her shoulder. Together, they crossed the dim room toward Nora, who stood staring at nothing, her gaze fixed somewhere past the far wall. I nudged the volume higher. I was not about to miss a syllable. "Hey, honey," Holt said, touching Nora's arm lightly. "Sorry for all this chaos, but the terms of our agreement are pretty clear: full payment upon event conclusion, or by 9:00 p.m., whichever arrives first. It's 8 o'clock, and this event is officially done." Nora turned to look at him as though she were seeing him through fog. "What the fee?" Brenda's voice came in crisp and cold. "$200 an hour, 4 hours of work, plus a travel stipend. That comes out to $1,000. Cash or Venmo." Nora just stared. "Who are you exactly?" "I'm Holt. She's Brenda." "We're the talent," the man said. "Cade booked us through Gigmasters, hired to portray his parents for the evening. Now are you cutting us a check, or do we open a dispute through the platform?" The strength drained right out of Nora's legs. She dropped onto the edge of the stage, that expensive gown spreading around her in a useless, crumpled heap. "Actors," she breathed. "You're both actors." "We are working professionals," Brenda shot back with a huff. "Working professionals expect to be compensated. So, where is Cade?" "He bolted," Nora said, her voice scraped clean of emotion. "He's gone. Miles away in my cabin." I watched the understanding fall over her, not like a wave, but like a ceiling collapsing. No one beside her. A dress she'd never paid for. A husband built entirely from borrowed money and fabricated charm. And the one person who would have stood by her without question, the father she had turned away at the gate. The tuition for that lesson was steep, and the semester wasn't over yet. On the screen, I watched the woman Nora had embraced all night as her future mother-in-law reached into her clutch. Gone was the languid, aristocratic composure. The performance had ended the moment the lights did. Brenda, $200 an hour, was clocking out. She produced a cigarette, touched a flame to it, and drew a long pull right there at the head table. The lighter's glow was a small, defiant star in the darkened room. A ribbon of smoke drifted toward the cold chandelier above. In any other setting, it would have been scandalous. This venue lived and breathed its own exclusivity. But Brenda was done caring about the house rules of a party that had already been shut down. She exhaled a lazy gray cloud directly into a bridesmaid's face, then shifted her attention to my daughter. Nora hadn't moved from the edge of the stage, her gown bunched around her like the remnants of something that used to be beautiful. She raised her eyes to Brenda, wet and searching, still hoping for something to hold on to. Her hand lifted toward the woman, trembling, reaching for the warmth that 6 hours of paid performance had almost made her believe was real. "Mom?" She managed barely above a whisper, swallowed by the low murmur rolling through the room. "Mom, tell me what to do." Brenda regarded her without expression, no softening, no outstretched arms. She pressed one manicured fingernail against the face of her watch. "Sweetheart, don't call me that," Brenda said. The voice that came out bore no resemblance to the warm, refined accent she had performed all evening. This was something rougher, a smoker's rasp, years in the making. The clock hit 8:00, and I was off duty at 8:00. It is now 8:05. My obligation ended 5 minutes ago. Besides, I don't consider this a safe working environment anymore. Nora's mind was visibly stuttering, trying to line up this woman with the role she had played so convincingly since the rehearsal dinner. "Obligation," Nora repeated faintly. Holt moved into the space beside Brenda. He tugged his bow tie loose with one long pull and worked his collar button open, exhaling like a man finally free of a too-tight costume. He fixed Nora with the look of a tradesman whose invoice has gone ignored too long. Lady Holt said, raising a finger in her direction, "We are not hobbyists. We were present at the rehearsal dinner. We showed up for the pre-ceremony reception. We endured every minute of that ceremony without so much as a yawn. We delivered exactly what was contracted. Cade's instructions were explicit cash payment the moment the toasts concluded. He swept the room, with his gaze searching the shadows where the groom used to be. That payment has not come," Holt said, addressing the room as much as Nora. "And I don't perform for free. My car note is due Tuesday." The nearest guests stopped whispering among themselves. They turned inward toward the stage. This was no longer background noise. This was the main event. "Wait, are you both actors?" a woman near the front asked. I knew that face. It was Nora's college roommate, someone who had spent years quietly making Nora feel ashamed of her roots. Holt squared his shoulders to the crowd and swept into a bow. "Holt, farewell." SAG-AFTRA eligible, he announced. Perhaps you've caught me in the Tri-State Mattress Depot spots. I'm the fellow who sleeps on the cloud. Recognition flickered across faces. Then someone laughed, one short, involuntary bark of pure disbelief. Hold on, a man at table 4 called out. You told me you built your wealth in offshore drilling. We talked oil futures for half an hour. I was in character, Holt said with a shrug. Method acting. Did a quick search on my phone during the drive it over. The humiliation kept radiating outward, expanding through the room, with Nora at its center. She clawed her way back to her feet, heels sliding on the polished floor. Enough! She screamed. Stop this right now. These are Cade's parents. They own property on Kiowa Island. They have a yacht. Brenda sent another stream of smoke drifting ceilingward. Honey, my address is a 2-bedroom walk-up in East Nashville, she said, voice flat as pavement. Public transit is my yacht. So either you settle up, or we involve law enforcement over a theft of services claim. Nora wheeled around. Cade! She screamed into the dark. Cade, make them stop! Cade was nowhere. The moment the deal collapsed, he had vanished, gone, the way every coward goes when the bill finally comes due. Nora stood in the rubble of everything she had constructed. The pair of hired strangers she had elevated above her own father were now demanding cash from her in front of 200 people. Then the phones appeared. First just a few, a quiet raise of a screen, a stolen snapshot. But once the collective understanding of what was happening took hold, there was no containing it. The guests she had handpicked, the crowd she had worked years to impress, abandoned her without hesitation. Not one of them moved to help. Every last one of them pointed a lens at her. I watched it from my screen, dozens of glowing rectangles floating in the dark like the eyes of something circling its prey. Camera flashes strobed, each one catching Nora's expression, at its most unguarded, preserving her terror frame by frame. I didn't need the audio feed. Their mouths said everything. They were broadcasting live. They were dropping it into their stories. They were hammering out hashtags. Wedding fail, groom missing, fake parents. Nora buried her face in both hands. She wanted to disappear, but the room had no shadows left to hide in. Every phone found her. This is what she built toward, I thought, settling back with my glass. Every calculated move, every curated connection, she wanted to be seen. She wanted the world watching. Well, it was watching. One bridesmaid dressed in pink that probably cost more than my truck positioned herself at the lip of the stage. She wasn't reaching down to help. She angled her phone for the optimal shot and hit record, Nora's sobs filling the background. Oh my God, you guys, she said, her voice floating up to the security mic. You will not believe this. The groom is a fraud. The parents are paid actors and the bride just got dumped at the altar because the checks bounced. This is literally the most insane thing I have ever seen. Every word landed. Nora's hands dropped. Her eyes found the bridesmaid's face. Amber, she said, her voice barely holding. Please don't. Amber didn't stop. She just found a cleaner angle, the fake mother's cigarette in hand, smoke curling above the ruined reception. This is gold, Amber said. I watched Nora fold, not just the posture, something deeper caving in underneath it. This wasn't only the shock of exposure. This was the moment she finally understood what she had actually built, who these people were, what they had always been. Not friends, an audience. And she had just become the show. Brenda closed the distance, stepping into Nora's space until there was nowhere to look but at her. Here's where things stand, Brenda said, voice dropping to a low, hard growl. Cade owes us $2,000. He's gone, which makes it your problem now. You are the bride. You signed on to this. Pay us. I don't have it, Nora sobbed. I don't have any money. Cade handled everything. Then hand over the ring, Brenda said. I went rigid in my seat. What? Nora let out a sharp breath, her left hand flying to her chest. The ring, Brenda said again. Her hand shot out and closed around Nora's wrist. Looks like a 2-carat stone to me. If it's genuine, that covers our fee. If it turns out to be cubic zirconia, I will be extremely displeased. No, Nora screamed, twisting to get free. That is my engagement ring. Consider it collateral, Holt said, moving to cut off any path of escape. Turn it over and we leave quietly. Refuse and we dial 911. Theft of services is a misdemeanor on its own, but given the dollar amount here, we could build a case for grand larceny once we stack the charges. Laughter broke out among the guests now. Not nervous politeness, something uglier, something raucous and raw. They were rooting for the performers, A chant rose up from the crowd. Give her the ring. Give her the ring. A mob. Dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns, but a mob all the same. No dinner had been served. No celebration had been had. The room wanted its pound of flesh. It wanted someone broken at the altar. Nora's eyes swept across those faces, the very people she had cut me out to impress, and what stared back at her was pure ridicule. She dropped her gaze to her own hand. Her fingers shook so badly the diamond threw sparks even in the dimness. "Fine," she screamed. "Just take it! Take it and go!" She yanked the ring from her finger, and she didn't extend her arm toward Brenda. She flung it across the room. It skittered over the floor, end over end, wobbling like a coin about to settle. Brenda crossed the distance faster than you'd expect from a woman her age scooping it up before it could disappear into a floor vent. She tilted it under the beam of an emergency light, one eye narrowed. "Not bad," Brenda said. "Should fetch a decent amount at a pawn counter." She glanced over at Holt. "We're square. We're square." Holt confirmed. He turned his gaze to Nora one final time. No apology came. No farewell. He straightened his collar, pulled his tie taut, and stepped back into the skin of someone who had no unfinished business here. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said. The pair of them pivoted and walked off that stage shoulder to shoulder, cutting through the heckling crowd. They pushed through the service exit and disappeared into the dark, my daughter's engagement ring riding in some actor's jacket pocket alongside a cigarette pack. Nora didn't move. She stood there staring at the bare white line on her finger, the only unmarked thing left on her. The guests drifted toward the exits in clusters, their evening's entertainment wrapped up. Not one of them offered the bride a word on their way out. She might as well have been a lamp they were walking around. Fragments reached me through the live microphones. What a disaster. I always knew she was trash. Did you catch the real dad versus the fake one? Who even does something like that? Nora's legs gave out. She went down to her knees right there on the dirty stage floor. The floral arrangements drooped in the stuffy, airless heat. Darkness had taken the room, almost entirely nothing left, but the cold red glow of exit signs cutting across the shadows. She was alone, not just abandoned, hollowed out, completely alone. I reached over for the whiskey bottle. Empty. Good. I had no use for it now. What came next required a steady hand and a clear mind. The demolition had run its course. Every wall had come down. Every beam had buckled. My daughter was somewhere in that wreckage. She drew her knees up and pressed her face into her arms. I sat there watching her shoulders heave. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. Her hand went into her dress pocket and came back with her phone. The screen cast a pale glow across her tear-soaked face. She found a number and pressed call. On my desk, my phone came alive. I checked the screen. Nora, I sat on my hands. 1 ring, 2, 3. Let her stay in that darkness a while longer. She needed to reckon with the fact that the man she'd had escorted off the premises wasn't some spare key she could reach for the moment things went sideways. I was never anyone's contingency. The ringing cut off. She pulled the phone away and studied it, baffled. 29 years I had picked up on the first or second ring no matter the hour. Tonight, the line just sat there dead. She pushed herself upright on unsteady legs, heels threatening to betray her. One slow look around the gutted room. Nobody was riding to her rescue. Cade was gone, the hired family was gone, every last guest was gone. She was going to have to get herself out on her own. I watched her descend from the stage. She nearly went over on the first step, grabbing a chair back to steady herself. Then she peeled off her shoes, expensive ones, and abandoned them on the floor like shed skins. She moved toward the exit in bare feet. I shut the iPad cover. Darkness. I already knew her destination. There was nowhere else left for her. I crossed to the front door of my cabin, turned the lock, and stopped. The chain stayed on. She was coming, yes, but she wasn't coming home to a safe harbor. She was arriving at a gate, and tonight I was the one deciding who passed through. The phone shrieked to life again, shrill and urgent in the stillness of the cabin. Caller ID lit up the dark. Nora. 4 rings. I wanted that silence to press down on her. I wanted her to feel the full tonnage of the gap she had engineered between us. 5th ring, I answered, no greeting. I just held the phone against my ear and waited. Dad. Nora's voice hit me like something breaking. I barely recognized it, scraped hollow, fraying at every edge. Dad, what is going on? The manager is saying you killed the power. He's saying you control the trust. Tell them you made an error. Tell them to restore the lights. I breathed slowly. I watched her on the screen, pacing tight circles in the blackness, gripping that phone, the way a drowning person grips a rope. It is not an error, Nora, I told her. Steady voice. The voice you use to read a forecast. I triggered clause 14C. The funding has been withdrawn. She laughed, sharp brittle on the edge of something breaking all the way. You don't control any funding. You live in a shack. That truck of yours barely makes it off the block. Cade covered all of this. Cade and his people. Cade is gone, Nora, I said. On the screen, I watched her wheel around, scanning the corners for a husband who was no longer there. And those people of his, they were hired performers, paid by the hour. The moment their shift clocked out, they walked. That is a lie, she shrieked. You're just jealous. You want to tear everything down because I left you off the guest list. You didn't simply leave me off a list, Nora. I set her straight. You had me banned. There was a photograph at the gate. Do not let this man in. You treated me like a trespasser. You treated the man who bankrolled your dress, your flowers, your lobster dinner, as though he were something to be scraped off a shoe. So I cleared the table. Silence settled over the call like a weight. You're the one who paid, she breathed. Every single penny I said. $212,000. Cade contributed nothing. His card was rejected trying to buy a whiskey sour at the lobby bar an hour ago. He's flat broke, Nora. Has been since the moment you laid eyes on him. No, she sobbed. That isn't true. He has millions. The crypto. The company. What he has is debt, I said, and I didn't soften the landing. $500,000 worth of gambling debt. He married you chasing the cash gifts. He married you because he had it in his head that my land was something he could flip. The crying went deeper now, heavy wrenching sobs that moved through her whole frame. I watched her fold into a chair, knees pulled tight to her body. Dad, please, she managed barely above a whisper. I'm scared. It's pitch dark in here. Everyone is gone. Cade won't pick up. Come and get me. Bring the truck, I don't care how old it is. Just come. My eyes went to the keys on their hook by the door, then back to the empty whiskey bottle. I can't come, Nora, I said. Why not? She cried. You're my father. Because I am banned, I reminded her. The security guard made it very plain. If I set foot on that property, he phones the police. I have no interest in creating an incident. I'm honoring the terms you set. Dad, just stop. Stop doing this to me. I have no cash. My car is gone. How am I supposed to make it home? You have 2 feet, I said. It's 5 miles. The moon is up and it's clear tonight. You're asking me to walk in a wedding dress. I'm asking you to feel what it's like to be the one standing on the wrong side of a locked door, I said. I want you to understand that you cannot spit in the face of the hand that feeds you and expect it to keep serving you dinner. Start walking, Nora. I ended the call. No dramatics, no slamming anything down. I set the phone back quietly, carefully. On the screen she stood motionless, staring at her own reflection in the dead display. What's about to happen in that ballroom changed everything, and not in the way anyone in that room expected. Before we get there, tell me this. If someone you loved chose a lie over you, would you wait for them to come to their senses on their own, or would you be the one to force the reckoning? She jabbed at the screen, trying to reach me again. I leaned over and pulled the cord from the wall jack. Class was dismissed. The real examination had only just begun. On the screen I watched a shape peel away from the heavy velvet curtains near the service entrance. Not a ghost, a rat nosing back onto a sinking vessel to see what scraps remained. Cade lurched into the pool of emergency light, his movements twitchy and desperate. The suit jacket was gone, his shirt hung open halfway down his chest, a gold chain, almost certainly gold-plated brass, catching the dim light. He wasn't looking at his wife. His eyes were locked on the table where the gift box had been stationed all evening, the one meant to collect envelopes of cash from well-wishers. He crossed to it and found bare linen. The staff professional to the end had cleared everything right along with the silverware. Cade drove his fist into the empty tablecloth. The sound was flat and pitiful. Cade, Nora whispered. She scrambled up off the floor, something fragile and desperate flickering behind her eyes. She believed he had returned for her. She cast him as the hero, riding back into the dark to pull her out. You came back? She ran to him, bare feet smacking the cold hardwood. She latched onto his arm with both hands. Cade, thank God. My dad. He lost his mind. He killed the power. He said awful things. We have to leave right now. We have to get out of here. Cade wheeled on her. No embrace, no comfort. He tore his arm free with a force that sent her stumbling backward. Where is the money, Nora? He hissed. Gone was the smooth baritone he deployed for investor meetings. This voice was pinched and ugly. The cards, the envelopes. What did they do with them? Nora stared at him, thrown. The gifts, I have no idea. The manager handled everything. Cade, why is that what matters right now? We need to get the police involved. My dad. Shut up about your dad. Cade screamed. Spittle flew from his lips, lit up by the harsh emergency light. Your father is the reason I'm finished. He locked the accounts. He froze the transfer. Do you understand what you've brought down on me? Nora flinched backward. I didn't do anything. I stood up for you. I had him banned for you. You didn't ban him hard enough. Cade pressed toward her, driving her back toward the edge of the dance floor. You swore to me he was a soft touch. You said he was a blue-collar guy sitting on a nest egg we could crack open. You never told me he was the shark who owns the whole tank. His fingers closed on her shoulders, digging in. Tell me you have cash on you, he demanded, shaking her. Your purse is up in the bridal suite. I need $50,000 right now. $50,000 about. Nora broke down. Cade, you're frightening me. Why would we need money? We're wealthy. You have the company. Cade laughed. It was the sound of glass grinding through a garbage disposal. There is no company, you stupid woman, he spat. There never has been. It's a website. It cost me $12 to register the domain. I needed your credit score. I needed your father's land. And now I've got nothing because you couldn't keep the old man at bay. I watched Nora's face come apart. Not mere heartbreak. This was the total demolition of everything she believed was real. The man she had worshipped, the one she'd hoisted above her own flesh and blood, was now staring back at her with naked, undisguised contempt. You used me, she whispered. I tried to, Cade said, but you turned out to be worthless. You're nothing but a broke girl with a wealthy daddy who wants nothing to do with her. You're a liability. Then, at the edge of the camera frame, the rear service doors moved. The ones I had instructed Auberly to unlock remotely 3 minutes ago. 3 men entered the ballroom. They bore no resemblance to wedding guests. Heavy leather jackets wrong for the weather, and expressions far too composed for the chaos around them. They moved with the deliberate planted gait of men accustomed to walking through any door they chose. I recognized the one in the center. It was Rocco the loan shark Farwell had flagged in the dossier. Cade saw them too. He went completely still. His grip on Nora's shoulders tightened until she cried out. Cade! Rocco called across the room. Conversational, almost warm. His voice carried easily through the hollow ballroom. Leaving already, we never got the chance to raise a glass to the newlyweds. Cade yanked Nora around, putting her body squarely between himself and the 3 men. He used my daughter as a shield. Rocco. Cade stammered, peering over Nora's shoulder. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. The wire got flagged by compliance. You know how the banks operate. I'll have it sorted Monday first thing. Rocco kept moving, no acceleration, no hesitation. Monday is a long road from here, Cade. Rocco said, and my associates get anxious over the weekend. Word reached us that the wedding fell apart. Word reached us the money got pulled. That tells us you might be thinking about taking a trip somewhere. No, Cade yelped. No trips? Look, she has it. He thrust Nora forward, shoving her toward the men. She's the one holding the money, Cade shouted. Her father is Eugene Harwick. He owns this whole property. Take her, hold her, and he'll pay. He loves her. He'll pay anything. Nora stumbled, barely catching herself just short of Rocco. She turned and looked back at her husband, her eyes wide and horrified. Cade, she gasped. What are you saying? Give them your jewelry, Cade screamed at her. The necklace, the earrings handed over. It's fake, Nora whispered, her hand rising to her throat. You told me it was vintage, but I had it cleaned and the jeweler told me. It's paste. You bought it at a kiosk. Cade's face clenched into something savage. His last card, his last bargaining chip. Worthless. He had swindled himself. Rocco stopped 5 feet away. He looked at Nora, trembling inside her dress. He looked at the fake stones at her throat. He gave a slow, patient shake of his head. We're not here for the girl, Cade, Rocco said. We're here for you. You signed the marker. Cade looked left, looked right. Every open exit was covered. There was no play left. Pure animal panic flooded in the cornered rat instinct that overrides everything else. He grabbed Nora one final time, not to shield himself, not to beg. He seized the bodice of her dress and heaved with everything he had. Get out of my way, he shrieked. He shoved her, not a push, a throw. He put the full weight of his desperation and his failure behind it. Nora went backward, her feet tangling in the layers of tulle and silk, unable to find purchase on the slick floor. She was airborne for a fraction of a second, a white shape suspended in the dark. She came down onto the centerpiece from table 4, which the staff had set on the floor during cleanup. A massive arrangement of white roses and gardenias soaking in a heavy vase of water. Nora struck it with a sickening crunch. The vase exploded. Water flooded out in every direction, swirling with dirt from the overturned pot. She rolled off the wreckage and hit the floor hard. Her beautiful dress drank up the water, the mud, the crushed petals within seconds. She lay there amid the ruins of everything she had built this night around herself. White petals clung to her soaked hair. The shoulder of her dress had torn open. She looked like something that had tried to fly and hit the earth instead. Cade never glanced back. He used the chaos of her fall to run. He sprinted for the kitchen doors, vaulting chairs, sending a bus cart crashing sideways. "Get him!" Rocco said, quietly, almost gently. The two men on either side of him moved, faster than their build suggested. They cut Cade off before he reached the swinging doors. One of them took him low and drove him skidding across the polished floor. Then they hauled him upright by the armpits. Cade was crying now, begging, bargaining, screaming promises into the dark. They walked him out the back door to where their car sat, waiting in the night. Rocco gave Nora one last look. She was fighting to push herself up her palms, sliding on the wet flower-strewn floor. Breath was coming out of her in shallow, shuddering pulls. "Sorry about the mess," Lady Rocco said. "But you picked yourself a loser." He turned and walked out, leaving Nora alone in the center of that ruined room. I zoomed the camera feed in tight. It was the image that would stay with me, not one I enjoyed, but one I knew had to be. Nora, on her hands and knees, ringed by broken glass and wilting flowers. The white dress, everything it had, represented every delusion and vanity it stood for destroyed. Gray with filthy water, streaked green from the crushed stems bleeding out beneath her. She raised her head. Mascara ran in dark rivers down both sides of her face. She looked around the silent, empty room. "Daddy," she whispered. The microphone caught every syllable. It was a small sound, a broken sound. "Daddy, I'm hurt." I sat in my cabin. My finger hovered over the call button on my phone. Every instinct screamed at me, "Get in the truck, drive through that gate, scoop her up and wipe her clean." But I drew my hand back. If I went to her now, she would never learn how to get back on her feet. If I wiped her clean, she would never really reckon with the stain her own choices had left. She had to sit in those flowers. She had to feel the cold water. She had to stare at the wreckage she had welcomed into her life. This was the bottom, and she had to hit it without a hand to catch her. The security gates of Magnolia Bluff Resort sealed shut with a mechanical finality that rang like a prison door. But Nora wasn't on the inside anymore. She was out on the street. The patch of pavement where my truck had dripped oil that morning became the starting line of her reckoning. She stood under the yellow wash of a street lamp for a long time. I couldn't see her from where I sat. The resort cameras didn't reach old Natchez Trace, but I knew exactly what she was looking at. 5 miles of asphalt, gravel, and darkness. A road she had traveled 1,000 times as a child in the back of my truck, complaining about every bump. Now she'd feel each one against the bare soles of her feet. She took the first step. She was still wearing one shoe. The other had been lost somewhere, back in the lobby, kicked off in her frantic scramble after a husband who had already walked away from her. She tried to move forward with that uneven, lurching gait. The remaining stiletto heel cracked against the tarmac like a metronome ticking off her misery. Click-scrape, click-scrape. After about 100 yards, she stopped. She lowered herself onto the guardrail, the metal cold and damp against the backs of her thighs. She unbuckled the remaining shoe and flung it into the ditch. It disappeared into the tall grass, a $1,000 pair of French-made heels pitched away like a fast food wrapper. Now she was barefoot. That soft shell pink pedicure she'd shown off on Instagram just the day before didn't stand a chance against old Natchez Trace. The asphalt was old, rough pitted with potholes scattered with loose gravel. She started walking again. This time, there was no clicking, just the soft, wet slap of skin on stone. A car came up from behind. I picture her spinning around, waving both arms, the diamonds on her bracelet, catching the headlights. She probably thought it was a resort guest. Maybe Amber. Maybe one of the groomsmen who had lifted a glass to her eternal happiness less than an hour before. The car didn't slow. It swerved just wide enough to miss the woman in the soiled white dress staggering along the shoulder, then powered away. The rush of air from its passing whipped her hair across her face and sprayed gravel against her legs. They didn't see a bride. They saw a woman in trouble on a dark road. They kept going. She kept walking. The adrenaline of the ballroom was draining out of her, replaced by the dull, throbbing weight of reality. Her dress, the Monique Lhuillier custom-designed silk and lace, had grown heavy. It had soaked up the water from the flower vases, and now it was drinking in the dew from the roadside weeds. It dragged behind her, collecting burrs, twigs, and mud. It wasn't a gown anymore. It was an anchor. She had to bunch the fabric up in her fists and hold it to her chest like a bundle of dirty laundry just to keep her legs moving. Mile 2. The blisters would have started by then. Soft skin grinding against rough pavement. Friction building into heat. Heat building into fluid giving way to raw, exposed nerves. She stepped on a sharp stone. She cried out, "I know she did." She sat down right there in the middle of the road to look at her foot. In the moonlight, the blood would have looked black. She probably checked her phone again. She had signal out here. She could see the notifications stacking up, the tags, the comments. The world wasn't sleeping. The world was laughing. Every step she took away from the resort carried her deeper into viral infamy. She wasn't just walking home. She was moving through a digital corridor of mirrors, every reflection twisted and mocking. She called Kate again, straight to voicemail. She called Amber straight to voicemail. She called her mother's old number, a line that had been disconnected for 10 years, just to hear a voice that wouldn't judge her. She got up. She was limping for real now. The cold was moving in. The night air in the valley falls fast. She was wearing thin silk against the dropping temperature. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking hard. Mile 3. This was the stretch with no streetlights. Just the canopy of oak trees swallowing the moon, pitch black. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the rustling in the brush. The hoot of an owl would sound like something closing in to a woman who had spent the last 5 years in the city. She had always been afraid of the dark. I used to leave the hall light on for her. Tonight, the only light she had was the distant glow of my cabin, a tiny yellow pinprick miles down the road. She broke into a run, a clumsy hobbling jog. She needed out of that darkness. She needed the safety of the place she had once called a shack. The irony must have tasted like ash. The luxury resort had turned her away. The penthouse was a lie. The shack was the only roof left in the world that wouldn't charge her admission. She tripped. It was always going to happen. Exhaustion, darkness, and broken ground are a merciless combination. She went down hard on her hands and knees. The gravel chewed into her palms. She didn't get up right away. She stayed there on all fours, gasping, retching up the emptiness in her stomach. She looked at her hands, scraped, bleeding, dirty. They looked just like my hands. She had spent her entire adult life trying to cut the construction worker out of her DNA. She got manicures. She used expensive creams. She wore gloves when she drove. But now, kneeling in the dirt, her blood mixing with the earth, she was exactly what she had always been trying to outrun. She was a Harwick, down in the mud. She dragged herself up. She was crying a low keening sound with no audience but the trees. She didn't wipe her face. She just let the tears carve tracks through the road dust on her cheeks. Mile 4. She could make out the outline of my property line. The fence I had built, the gate she had rolled past a week ago in a rented Maserati, laughing at how plain it was. Now that gate looked like the pearly gates of heaven. She hauled her feet forward one step, then another. She was leaving a trail of bloody footprints on the asphalt, peeling away the layers of pretension with every agonizing yard. The entitlement was gone. The arrogance was gone. What remained was just the bare fact of survival. She reached the turnoff from my driveway. The gravel there was fresh and sharp. It must have felt like walking across broken glass. She saw the cabin lights. She saw my truck parked out front. The truck she hated. The truck she had forbidden. She didn't look at it with contempt tonight. She looked at it with longing. She walked alongside the hood, her hand trailing along the rusted fender, needing something solid beneath her fingers. She stumbled up the 3 wooden porch steps. She stood in front of the door. She raised a hand, shaking bloody bare of its diamond ring. She didn't knock. She collapsed against the wood, sliding down until she was a heap of ruined white silk on my welcome mat. She had walked 5 miles through hell to get back to where she started, but she hadn't crossed the finish line yet. The door was locked, and I was waiting on the other side. I heard the thud of her body hitting the door, then a low guttural sob that moved through the wood like a current. Then came the pounding. Not a polite knock, the frantic, desperate hammering of someone who feels the wolves right behind them. I stood on the other side of that oak door, my hand resting on the deadbolt. I could hear her breathing ragged and wet, like a swimmer breaking the surface after nearly going under. "Open the door!" she screamed. Her voice was cracked raw from 5 miles of crying in the dark. "Dad, open the damn door! It's me!" I turned the deadbolt. The metal slid back with a heavy mechanical snap. I turned the knob, but I didn't swing the door open. I had put the security chain on earlier, a thick run of hardened steel links. The door swung 4 inches, just enough to see her, just enough for her to see me. The sliver of her face visible through that gap was a portrait of ruin. Leaves and mud had crusted into her hair. Mascara had bled down her face and dark, ugly streaks beneath both eyes. A gash on her cheekbone wept thin lines of blood through the road grime. The smell coming off her was swamp rot and curdled perfume. She jammed her arm into the 4-inch gap, fingers scrabbling toward the chain body lurching against the wood. Her nails were split and raw, the polish cracked down to the skin. "Let me in," she managed, voice coming out in ragged gasps. "It's cold. I'm hurt. Open this door right now." I didn't reach for the chain. I just stood there, a glass of water in my hand that I had poured sometime earlier and never touched. I watched her bloody fingers clawing at the air inside a home she had sneered at 7 days ago. "You can't come in, Nora," I told her. I kept my voice flat. No heat behind it at all. Heat is what anger feels like. What I felt was closer to absolute zero. "What?" Her hand dropped. She pressed her face to the crack, one eye finding mine through the gap, wild disbelieving. "What did you just say?" "I said the door stays shut," I repeated. "You spelled it out for me. I don't belong in your world. You posted a sign. You put a man at the gate. You drew the boundary. This doorway is where it lands. Your side is out there." A sound tore out of her somewhere between hysterical laughter and a wail. "Have you lost your mind? I just walked 5 miles barefoot. I'm bleeding. Cade walked out on me. He took everything. You destroyed my wedding, you stubborn old man. And you'd really leave me standing here in the cold? I didn't destroy anything, Nora," I said. "I just pulled my money out of a fraud. That's a different thing entirely." She threw herself against the door. The chain snapped taut and held 3-inch screws driven into solid framing. "I put those in myself." "You pulled your money," she spat. "Like that makes it fine. You stood there and let me get humiliated in front of every person I know. Cade will sue you into the ground. He'll tear this dump apart board by board." I lifted the glass and drank. The cold water helped me stay level. "Cade isn't suing anybody, Nora," I said. "Right about now, Cade is sitting in the back of a black SUV trying to explain to a man named Rocco why he's short $50,000. That landed. Her body went rigid. "Rocco? Who is Rocco?" "A loan shark." I said, keeping my tone easy, the way you'd explain something simple to someone learning it for the first time. "He owns the paper on Cade's gambling debts. $540,000. Nora, that's the number your husband is carrying. That's why he needed a wife with a wealthy father. The cash gifts off those registry cards were buying him time, nothing more." "That's a lie," she breathed, her forehead going against the doorframe. "He built Apex Horizon from nothing. He's brilliant." I turned toward the hallway table behind me, where I'd set the dossier earlier in the evening. I pulled out the 1-page summary from the background check, creased it down the middles, and fed it through the gap. "Read the paper," I said. She grabbed it out of my hands. Through the crack, I could see her unfold it, fingers trembling, the porch light swaying above her, throwing pale light across the page. Her eyes moved fast. "Employment record car, rental counter, cell phone kiosk, let go for theft. Credit score, 420. 6 active judgments against him." The sheet drifted out of her fingers and settled face down in a muddy puddle on the porch floor. "That's a forgery," she said. But the certainty wasn't in her voice anymore, just noise filling the space where conviction used to be. "You fabricated it because you despised him from the start. Because he had things. Because he moved in circles you never could. Because he wasn't some blue-collar worker with dirt under his fingernails." I took a long look at her through that sliver of open door. She was shuddering now, the adrenaline that had carried her 5 miles completely spent, nothing left to hold back the cold. "I despised him because he was running a Conora. And I despised him because he sold you a story that the man who kept a roof above you for 18 years wasn't worthy of a seat at your table or a plate of food." The crying started again, but it was a different grade of crying, calculated. The version she used to pull out when she was angling for something, a later curfew, a new phone. "Daddy, please," she sobbed. "I know the sign was wrong, I know. But that was Cade pushing me. He said his family was rigid about class, that they'd judge you, that I needed to manage the optics. I was trying to run interference. I was trying to spare you from that." "Spare me," I said. I moved closer to the door. "You weren't shielding me from anything, Nora. You were guarding the version of yourself you'd built for other people. You were mortified. You looked at that old truck and saw a man who hadn't made it. You looked at these hands and saw something beneath you. The years of work behind them, the cost of them, none of that registered. You just saw a picture that didn't match the life you were performing online." "I told you I'm sorry," she cried, both fists hitting the wood. "I said I'm sorry. Now slide that chain back. I have no place left. The apartment is gone. They removed me tonight." "I'm aware," I said. "I'm the one who pulled the lease guarantee." "You what?" She stumbled back a half step, eyes blown wide. "You were the guarantor on that lease. Who did you think was covering the rent every month that Cade's wire transfers turned up empty?" I asked. "Who kept your car insured? Who do you suppose is responsible for paying for the dress you've destroyed tonight?" She went quiet. Her hand moved to the ruined silk, pressing the torn fabric like she was only now registering it. "You paid for it," she said softly. "For all of it," I said. 3 solid years. Nora, every shortfall, every emergency, every time Cade's finances hit a wall, I was the one filling the hole. Routed through accounts you'd never trace back to me. I did it because I wanted you to stand up straight and feel like you'd earned something. But the floor you were standing on was mine. Tonight, I pulled it. Why, the word came out, half scream, half sob. "If the money is there, why live in this place? Why keep that truck? Why walk around looking like you've got nothing? You let me believe that. You made me think we were scraping by." "Nobody made you think a thing," I said, and I let the edge into my voice. "You drew your own conclusions the moment you stopped actually looking. You read the cover and closed the book. You never once sat down and asked me what I was building, what I'd put together over the years. Every conversation we had about money was you telling me what you needed next. Here's what's true, Nora," I continued. "I have more than Cade could have drained across 10 lifetimes. The resort where you got married today, I own it. The ground beneath this cabin, plus 300 units across the city mine. I am not a poor man, but I live inside these walls because your mother and I built them together, and that means something to me. I drive that truck because it gets me where I'm going, and I've never needed a status symbol to tell me what I'm worth." Through the 4-inch gap, I watched it all hit her at once, each fact like a fist. I could see greed surfacing right alongside the shame, the two of them wrestling in her eyes. The math was catching up to her. She had cut loose a father who was worth a fortune and chained herself to a man who owed $540,000 to someone named Rocco. "Dad," her voice dropped, softened. The wheedling tone crept in, the one she had been using since she was 15. "Dad, listen, if things are the way you're saying, this is fixable. We settle Cade's account. We get the apartment sorted, and everything resets. I need you. I'm your daughter. You can't stand on the other side of this door and do nothing. I'm the only child you have." I glanced at the chain. It was biting into the anchor screws as she leaned into the door. "I'm not cutting you a check, Nora," I said. "Not for this. Not ever again." "You don't mean that. You can't." She flinched like I had struck her. "It's your responsibility." "My responsibility was to send a decent human being out into the world," I said. "I came up short somewhere. I padded too much, cushioned too much. Let you coast on the idea that you sat above the people clearing your plates and hauling your bags. I built a sense of entitlement where there should have been a spine." "I am above them," she shot back, the composure cracking wide open. "I have a college degree. I run a creative department. You hold a reception desk with an inflated job title, Nora." I said, no softness in it. "And as of tonight, you've got no address. You've also got no job coming, because I know you charged the florist deposit to the company card. The moment I report that charge as unauthorized, your employer is going to show you the door. Everything you are right now is what you can produce with nothing but your own effort, and your hands are empty." She looked down at those hands, really looked at the torn palms, the dried blood, the absent ring. "So, this is where we land," she murmured. "You're going to leave me out here to freeze. I hurt your pride, and now I'm supposed to die for it." "You're not going to die," I said. "And my pride has nothing to do with what's happening here. Whatever I felt died the night I saw that sign. This is about who you've become, Nora. Something in you is broken all the way through. People are pieces to you. Family is a ledger. Love is a thing you stage for whoever's watching. I slid the chain free. She sucked in a breath and lunged forward, ready to push through. I dropped my boot against the base of the door and held it there solid as a wall. I kept my eyes on hers, nothing between us but 4 inches of wood and a ruined marriage. "I'm not opening this door," I told her. "If you come inside, you'll stand under a hot shower. You'll eat food from my kitchen. You'll curl up into your old bed. And when daylight comes, you'll wake up despising me all over again. You'll despise me for watching you fall apart like this. You'll despise me for having the money you've always wanted, and you'll start working on how to get it. You won't learn a single thing." "Then what am I supposed to do?" she shrieked, spittle hitting my face. "Where do you expect me to go?" I reached into my shirt pocket and drew out a key plain silver nothing on the ring. I let it drop it through the gap. It hit the porch boards with a small, sharp ping. "That unlocks Unit 4B at the tenements on Depot Row," I said. "Studio apartment, hot plate mattress. Rent is covered for 1 month. There's a bus pass on the counter and a job application for the diner on the ground floor. Depot Row." The word came out like she'd bitten something rotten. "That's the slums. That's where you grew up." "Exactly," I said. "That's where I started. That's where I figured out you don't eat if you don't work. That's where I understood that a man's worth isn't the suit on his back, it's whether his word holds up." "I am not setting foot in that place," she yelled. "I am Nora Harwick." "You are Nora," I said. "Nothing else attached to that name until you go out and earn the rest." She looked at the key sitting in the dirt. Then she looked at me. "I hate you," she said, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. "I hate you more than I have ever hated anything." "I know," I said, and I meant it quietly. "That's exactly why you can't walk through this door. You don't love me. You love what I can hand you." I stepped back. "Dad, wait!" she cried, reading the finality in it. "Dad, please. It's dark. I'm scared." "You should be," I said. "The world gets frightening fast when there's no father paying the bills anymore." I began pulling the door shut. "Dad!" Her voice cracked into a scream. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'll do whatever you want." "Pick up the key, Nora," I said through the narrowing gap. "Pick it up and start moving. The bus stop is a mile down the road. Last bus runs at 4 a.m. You've got time." "My feet," she sobbed. "They hurt." "If feet toughen up," I said. "That's what they do when you put them to use." I held her gaze one last time through the closing gap. Her face was tragedy itself under the porch light. "I'm not being cruel, Nora. I'm handing you the lesson that should have come 10 years ago. I'm showing you how to hold yourself up without a net underneath you. This is the only gift I have left to give. I am giving you a bottom." I shut the door. I turned the deadbolt. I drove the chain home. Her scream hit the wood a second later. Not grief, not sorrow. Pure, impotent rage. She hammered on the door for another 10 minutes. She cursed my name. She cursed Cade. She cursed everything that existed. Then silence came. I stood still and let it settle. 5 minutes, 10, a scrape on the porch boards, then slow, uneven footsteps retreating down the steps. I moved to the window and tilted the blinds. She was crossing the driveway. One hand held the ruined dress up off the ground. The other had that silver key locked in her fist, like she was holding on to the only solid thing left in the world. She was pointed toward the road, toward the bus stop, toward the bottom. I switched off the porch light. The lesson had started. I had taken the back roads, the shortcut I knew from my years doing framing work, and I beat Nora to the Depot Row tenement building by 20 minutes. I sat in the dark cab of my truck, parked on the far side of the street, and watched the empty bus stop down the block. The streetlights buzzed and flickered, throwing a sick yellow wash over cracked sidewalks and dumpsters backed up against the curb. This was the stretch of the city the council had stopped thinking about. Sirens were just background noise here. Hope traded at a steep discount. 20 minutes later, she appeared coming out of the shadow of the alleyway, limping hard on both feet. She'd walked the whole distance, never took the bus. Maybe she couldn't face the fluorescent glare of public transit in a wedding dress that was now just a muddy rag. Maybe she needed to punish herself with every step. She moved like something half gone, a pale, dragging figure hauling a silk train that had long since stopped being a dress. She pulled up in front of the building and stood there looking at it. 4 stories of tired brick that had weathered its best days sometime in the 1950s. Iron bars across every window. a steel entry door dented from years of being forced open by a shoulder instead of a key. She read the number above the door, 412. She looked at the silver key in her palm. Even from across the street, I could see the shaking. I stepped out of the truck. The door swung shut behind me with a crack that split the quiet street like a shot. Nora spun around, eyes blown wide, body braced for something. When she realized it was me, the tension drained right out of her. Not relief. Defeat. "You were already here," she whispered, voice worn down to gravel. "I own the building, Nora," I said, walking across. "I know the shortcuts." She turned back to the facade. A baby was crying up on the second floor. Voices were going at each other hard on the third. The air held the smell of stale beer and boiled cabbage. "This is it," she said. "This is where you want to put me." "This is where you're going to live," I said. "Come on." I walked past her and pushed the front door open. The lock had been broken for 10 years. I held it for her. She stood in the graffiti-covered hallway and looked into the dark for a long moment. Then she walked in. We went up the stairs without a word. The elevator was wrapped in yellow caution tape, done for 4 flights. The stairwell carried the smell of bleach laid over something older and worse. Nora gagged and brought her hand up over her nose, but she kept climbing. The street was the only other option. We reached 4B. I took the key from her hand. It was shaking too hard to be useful and let us in. I hit the light switch. A bare bulb in the center of the ceiling stuttered on, hard and unsparing, showing everything the room had and didn't have. 300 square feet, give or take. Linoleum peeling back at every corner. A twin mattress on the floor in the far corner, made up with sheets that were clean, but told you exactly what they cost. 1 table, 1 chair, a hot plate on the counter beside a mini fridge. The walls had been painted something meant to be cream that had aged into the color of an old cigarette stain. Nora walked to the middle of the room. She turned in a slow circle. She looked at the barred window that gave onto a brick wall 3 feet away. She looked at the bathroom door that wouldn't fully close. "It's a cell," she whispered. "It's a beginning," I said. I let the door fall shut behind me and put my back against it. "This isn't a punishment, Nora," I said. "It's history. You don't recognize this place, do you?" She looked at me, exhaustion and confusion tangled together on her face. "Why would I know this dump?" "Because you lived here," I said. "Your first 2 years, this Unit 4B. I carried you and your mother through that door straight from the hospital. I was mixing concrete on job sites during the day and studying blueprints at night at that table. Your mother cut curtains out of scrap fabric and hung them on those windows to make the place feel like something. She went still, looking at the walls, like she was searching for something she couldn't quite see. We were happy inside these walls," I said. "No money, no standing. But we had one another, and we had something to work toward. We fought our way out of this room, Nora, your mother, and I. We didn't marry our way out. We didn't run a con to get there. We built our way out 1 year at a time." I crossed to the small table. A folder sat on top of it. I flipped it open. "Here's how this goes," I said. My voice left no crack for argument. "Rent on this unit is paid for 1 year. Utilities are in your name, prepaid for the first 3 months. After that, you carry them yourself." I pointed to the job application beside the folder. "That's for the diner downstairs, Otto's Place. I know the owner, he's holding a spot for you. Tomorrow morning, 6:00 a.m., first shift. Minimum wage plus whatever you earn in tips. You'll wear the uniform, you'll pour the coffee. You will wipe down tables, and you will keep a smile on your face while you do it." "I can't be a waitress," she sobbed. "I have a degree in art history." "Your degree didn't help you recognize a con man standing right in front of you," I said. "Maybe working a breakfast shift will teach you to tell the difference between somebody who wants something and somebody who actually needs it." I pulled a prepaid flip phone from my coat pocket and dropped it onto the mattress. "That's your phone. My number is already in it. So is the police. So is the fire department. What isn't in it is Instagram. What isn't in it is any of the people from your old life. You're going dark, Nora. You're going to vanish from the world you spent so long trying to impress." She stared at that cheap plastic shell like it had personally offended her. Next to the smartphone she'd lost, it looked like something from a garage sale. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice thin and unsteady. "If I just leave?" Then you leave," I said. "The door isn't locked, but if you walk out of here tonight, Nora, you walk out of my life for good. No inheritance, no contact, no floor under you. You become someone I used to know." I let that sit on her for a moment. Then I let my voice come down just slightly. "But if you stay, If you put in 1 full year, if you prove to me that you can live on a wage you earned yourself, that you can stand on your own without leaning on a man or a family account, then we can talk." "Talk about what?" she asked, dragging the back of her hand under her nose. "A position," I said. "A real one inside my company. Not a director's office, not a VP title. Entry level. You'd start at the bottom and learn what it actually looks like to build something floor by floor." She looked at me for a long moment. The swollen red eyes that looked back held none of the arrogance that had lived there for 10 years. She took in the mattress on the floor, the hot plate on the counter, the wreckage of silk and lace she was still wearing, a costume for a performance that had been canceled mid-act. She understood then that she had nothing left to bargain with. Kate had gutted her future. I had pulled the cushion out from under her. There was nothing beneath her feet now. I watched the last of the fight drain out of her. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin went toward her chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Just say it so I can hear it," I said. "Okay," she said louder this time. "I'll stay. I'll do it." "Good." I moved to the door. My hand found the knob. "There are clothes in the closet," I said. "I went to Target. Jeans, work shirts, a decent pair of shoes. Get out of that dress, Nora. Burn it if you want. It doesn't belong to who you're going to be." I opened the door. "Dad?" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Yeah. Did you really put up that sign?" she asked. "Was that really you?" I looked out at the dark hallway. "No, Nora," I said. "You put the sign up. I just honored it." I walked out and let the door close behind me. I heard the lock engage. I stood there a moment in that stale, dim hallway, just listening. I heard her cross the linoleum floor. I heard the rustle of the dress coming off. And then I heard the pipes knock and the shower start to run. She was rinsing away the mud, the mascara, the lie, all of it going down the drain. I walked down the stairs, boots landing heavy on each step. I got into my truck and turned the engine over. I didn't pull away right off. I sat there watching the lit window of apartment 4B for a long time. The light stayed on. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Leaving her in a place like that, leaving my daughter to scrub other people's dishes and count out change at the end of a shift. Every cell in my body wanted to climb back up those stairs, get her into a warm blanket and drive her home. Tell her none of it was real. Tell her it was over. But a parent's job isn't only to keep their children safe from harm. It's to make them capable of facing it. And Nora wasn't capable. She was cushioned, entitled, and fragile at the core. If I reached in and rescued her now, she would stay that way. But if I let her break all the way down, there was a chance, a real chance, she might build herself back into something that could last. I put the truck in gear and left the curb. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time since morning, something small and quiet was flickering in my chest. She hadn't bolted. She hadn't given up. She had stayed. The demolition was finished. The foundation was down. Now the real work could begin. I kept watch through the changing seasons from my truck parked down the block. Summer bled into autumn, and the trees along Depot Row went bare one by one, leaving the tenement standing raw and gray against an empty sky. Winter came after that, painting the glass of apartment 4B with frost that traced patterns across the bars like ironwork. I never went up. I never called, but I watched. Every morning she came through that front door at 5:30. Early on, she walked with her head tucked down, shoulders rolled in against the cold, wearing the cheap coat I'd put in the closet. She looked like a person serving a sentence. But as the months stacked up, something in her carriage shifted. Her spine straightened. Her stride opened up. She stopped watching the ground and started looking forward. I went to Otto's diner, sometimes, always the back booth cap, pulled low deep enough in the shadows that she wouldn't spot me. I watched her work. It wasn't gentle work. The morning rush at Otto's is a war zone of clattering plates, shouted orders, and customers who mistake a 3D tip for a license to treat the staff like furniture. One morning, a man in a press suit snapped his fingers in her direction because his toast had gone cold. "Excuse me, sweetie," the man said. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. This is garbage. Take it back." The Nora from a year ago would have thrown the plate at his feet. The Nora from a year ago would have told him her shoes cost more than his car. But this Nora didn't flinch. She picked up the plate without a word. "I apologize, sir," she said, voice flat and professional. "I'll bring you a fresh order right away." She turned and moved back toward the kitchen, stepping around a busboy hauling a tower of dirty dishes. She didn't cry. She didn't complain to anyone. She fixed the problem and moved on. I watched her count out her tips at the end of a shift. once sitting at the counter, in a uniform stained with coffee and ketchup, sorting crumpled singles and loose coins into careful stacks. I could see her lips moving, running the numbers: rent, electric, food, bus fare. One Tuesday in March, I trailed her to the grocery store, not Whole Foods, the discount place on the corner where the fluorescent lights flickered and the produce always had a soft spot or two. She was carrying a basket, not a cart. She picked up a package of ground beef, read the price tag, and set it back down. She chose a box of store-brand pasta instead. At the register, she counted exact change from a small plastic coin purse. She came up 5 cents short. The cashier, a tired teenager, let out a long breath. I saw Nora's face go red, not fury. Genuine, quiet shame. She didn't demand a manager. She didn't reach for a card that wasn't hers. "Take the apple off," she said, keeping her voice low and steady. "I don't need it." That was the moment I knew. The entitlement hadn't just faded. It had been burned clean out of her, replaced by the cold, unglamorous arithmetic of real life. She had learned the lesson that no art history degree ever taught: you cannot spend what you have not earned. Spring came. The ice along Depot Row softened and ran off in thin rivulets. Nora was still there. She hadn't tracked down a friend with a spare room. She hadn't landed herself another wealthy man to pay her way. She was pulling double shifts. She was tired and lean, her hands rough from bleach and dishwater. But her eyes were different. The hunted, desperate look of the woman on my porch was gone. What had taken its place was something steadier, the quiet gaze of someone who has sat in the dark and discovered they can endure it. Exactly 1 year to the day after the wedding, I walked through the door of Otto's Diner at 10 in the morning. The breakfast crowd had cleared out. The place smelled of bacon grease and disinfectant. I didn't take the back booth this time. I sat by the window. Nora was behind the counter working a cloth over the pie case. She looked up. She went completely still. The rag stopped moving. We looked at each other across the length of the room. She didn't rush toward me. She didn't call out. She set the rag down, lifted a coffee pot and a clean mug off the counter, and came around to my table. She poured. Black, no sugar, exactly how I drink it. "Hello, Dad," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "Hello, Nora," I said. She set the pot down and drew a pad from her apron. "What can I get you?" she asked. "The special today is meatloaf. It's actually pretty good today. Otto made it fresh." I looked at her standing there. She wore a name tag that read Nora, no title underneath it, no pretension, just her name. "I'm not here to eat," I said. "I came to talk business." She didn't reach for a chair. She stayed on her feet, attentive to the customer, respectful of the man across from her. I reached into my jacket, not for a checkbook. I pulled out a single manila folder and pushed it across the laminate tabletop. "Open it," I said. She wiped both hands on her apron before she touched it. She lifted the cover. Inside was one sheet of paper, an employment contract. "Magnolia Bluff Resort," she read aloud. "Position Junior Operations Associate. It's entry level," I said. "You'll report to the housekeeping manager. You'll inspect rooms. You'll handle guest complaints. You'll work the holidays. The salary is $45,000 a year, enough for a decent apartment. Not a penthouse, but a place where the heat actually works." Her eyes came up to mine. They were wide. "You want me working at the place where all of it happened?" "I want you learning how to run it," I said. "The general manager is gone. I let him go last week. He took a little too much pleasure in what happened to you that night. What I need is somebody who understands what it means to build from nothing. Somebody who's felt what it's like to be on the wrong side of a locked door, so they never put a paying guest there." She looked back down at the contract. Her thumb moved slowly over the resort's name. "And if I say no, then you stay here," I said. "You're a good waitress, Nora. Otto thinks the world of you. There's a real life to be built in this place. It's honest work." She closed the folder. She held it flat against her chest. "Why?" she asked. "Why right now?" "Because you stayed," I said. "Because you counted out pennies for a box of pasta and didn't call me once in 12 months looking for a way out. You served your time, Nora. You laid the foundation yourself. Now, I'm putting the bricks in front of you." Tears climbed into her eyes, but she didn't let them move. She pulled in a long breath and gave a single nod. "I accept," she said, "but I have one condition." I lifted an eyebrow. "You're negotiating." "I want to pay you back," she said. "For the wedding, for the dress, for the rent on the apartment upstairs. I know it'll take years. I want it taken out of my salary, a payment plan in writing." I held her gaze. I saw the steel in her jaw. I saw the builder her blood had always carried. "Deal," I said. She reached across and took my hand. Her palm was rough. There were calluses on it. It felt like shaking hands with myself. "Table 4 needs a refill," she said, pulling back. "I'm off at 2. If you're picking me up, be out front." She turned and went back to the counter. No strut to it, just a woman moving with a clear sense of where she was going. I watched her until she rounded the end of the counter. I lifted the coffee cup and drank. It was hot and strong, and it hit exactly right. It was the best cup of coffee I had ever tasted. The sign at the gate was gone. That cup of coffee she poured me black, no sugar, just right. I have thought about it nearly every day since. It was the first honest thing that had passed between us in years. What this cost me is hard to put into words. There were nights sitting in that truck outside a Depot Row tenement when I wondered if I had gone too far. If the love behind what I was doing would ever be visible to her through all that pain. I believe God puts certain moments in front of us, not to break us, but to burn away what was never real to begin with. That is what that year was. For both of us. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. First, the most loving thing you can do for someone who is drowning is refuse to drown with them. Hold the line even when it costs you sleep. Second, wealth is not what you possess. It is what you can build with your own hands when everything else is gone. Nora learned that counting pennies at a checkout line. Some lessons only land that way. Third, if someone in your life has never had to face a real consequence, you may be the one standing in the way of the person they were meant to become. For anyone out there navigating a family revenge story of your own, or sitting with the quiet ache of a relationship that went wrong somewhere, I hope something here found you. This kind of story belongs to all of us adults. If 50 plus who have lived long enough to know that love without honesty is just performance. If this moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below telling me where you stood at the end. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, there is more where this came from. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people worth keeping.